farming groups are again calling on the government to make sure that it takes a split gas approach to greenhouse gas emissions. I'm joined by Dairy NZ Chair Jim van der Poel. What's your worry about that? I mean, I thought that was fairly clear now with both, I suppose with Hiawaka Ikenoa and the other approaches, that methane is being treated differently to carbon.
Yes, it is. Through Hiawaka Ikenoa, it will be treated differently, and the split gas approach is recognised through Hiawaka Ikenoa. And so I guess we have presented our report to the government, and now we're just waiting for the government to then actually look at it, and then hopefully adopt it in its present form. I guess what we're asking the government now is to make sure that we're using the latest science to decide what the appropriate targets for methane and that should be.
So you think probably that target range, I think 24 to 47%, that it's perhaps still too high?
Well, the thing is, our view at least is there's a reasonable amount of politics in that, depending who you talk to, how much science that number is, and how much politics is in there to actually achieve that number, or how that number was set. And what we're saying is the science in this is evolving all the time. And because methane in New Zealand is methane's a short-lived gas, but in New Zealand it's no longer increasing. If anything, it's slightly decreasing. And so given that new agriculture does, and methane's a big part of agriculture emissions, but agriculture accounts for 50% of New Zealand's total emissions, but not 50% of the warming. And the Paris Accord is all about stopping global warming. And so then you say, well, okay, then what role does methane then have to play in ensuring New Zealand meets its commitments to the Paris Climate Accord? And then it's around understanding what the warming impact is of methane in a New Zealand context, and then what the appropriate targets would be.
And of course, I think one of the issues that's been raised too is about just how easy it is for farmers to cut methane emissions, given whether technology is available or not. And at this point, I guess there, as you say, there's no silver bullet. But I'm just wondering, what role do you think this new Centre for Climate Action on Agricultural Emissions, what role will that play in transferring technology on farm to cut emissions?
That's still being set up. So exactly what role it will play is not yet clear to us. And I'm happy for the team as it comes available to feed that through to you as the latest information on that. But the intention here is to make sure that through that centre that we actually invest in the right technologies going forward that will help us meet our climate change commitments. And also because as we all know already, New Zealand is the most efficient in the world at producing dairy and meat and a lot of the proteins, through our production systems. We're a lot more efficient. So if we were to produce less to meet our climate change commitments, but then export that or someone else pick up that demand, then from a global perspective, it might help New Zealand meet its commitments to Paris, but it won't help New Zealand economically and won't actually help the world, because that means that the world would be worse off through that. So the opportunity here is for us to find those mitigations in the long run, make sure the targets are right, but find those mitigations and then implement those, and that helps us meet our targets, and that is the right outcome. And so that way we can continue to make sure that those primary sectors continue to make the economic contribution to New Zealand that they do at the moment.
There's been a lot of talk, and obviously from groups, particularly like Greenpeace, calling for a big reduction in the size of the dairy herd. But, I mean, is it possible to retain the same level of profitability and production while also, cutting herd numbers?
Well, we don't have a view whether there's enough herd numbers or whether there's too many cows or not enough cows or what the numbers should be. Our objective is to make sure we are part of the solution and meeting our share of the commitment to the Paris Climate Accord and other commitments we have, like fresh water and water quality and things like that. So we see ourselves, what we focus on is how do we make sure that we're meeting our methane targets and our targets generally, and how do we ensure we're having lesser impact on water quality than what some regions are now. And so we're having that solution. So what the right cow numbers are, or the right stock numbers, or whatever, it's a secondary issue for us. So that's for us, because a lot of the land that stock are running on, that's the appropriate use for that land. And so then it's about saying, how do we ensure that the farming system deliver the right outcomes from an environmental point of view, from a sustainability point of view, from an economic point of view, and from a contribution to New Zealand's wellbeing point of view.
Are there any technologies at the moment or any changes in farm management practice that could be implemented at the moment to help bring down emissions further?
There are, like productivity, the number's something like since 1990, if we hadn't made the improvements that we'd made, our total emissions today would be something like 30% higher in the dairy industry. And so because a lot of improvements have been made. So a lot of the low-hanging fruit has already been picked up by farmers, even in that, and so the reason why our total emissions are not down as much as 30% is because the whole sector has grown over that period of time. And so, but we'd be emitting 30% higher if we had the same practices today as we had in 1990. And so there's still an opportunity here to continue, like productivity improvements help actually methane as well, because there's a strong relevance to feed eaten and methane output. So through genetics, we can make improvements and there's a lot of work going on in that field. Through productivity improvements we can make, even simple things like getting more cows and calves, so you have to rear less replacements to maintain your herd if you're a farmer. All those little things contribute to actually meeting our climate change commitments.
And is there a market pressure to do this? I mean, if you think now, Prime Minister heading to Europe to, hopefully give the free trade talks with the European Union a push, but we know European consumers in particular are looking at these sorts of issues. Are farmers here under pressure to make sure they can tell the right story to consumers overseas?
That's always important because it's part of the whole New Zealand provenance story. And so whether we're under pressure, you could argue we're under pressure from the market because a lot of our key customers, for example, like Nestle and Danone and all those, they have their own targets and they're looking at their suppliers to actually help them meet their own targets. And so if we have the lowest footprint, that puts us in a good position to be a food supplier. Then either ensure that they purchase our products or try and make sure we get a premium for that. And so part of our target going forward, or objectives going forward, is to ensure we maintain that position. Because a lot of the work that's being done, of course, with our competitors or generally in the world is one of the ways that people are looking at reducing emissions is through feed additives. And if you are a pasture-based system, that's a little bit harder to implement. So what we're doing is trying to join up with a lot of the research that's going on around the world, but trying to make sure that we actually develop it so it uniquely fits New Zealand's profile. And in that process, we don't lose that strong position we already have. And so we maintain that position because some of those technologies that will appear will be easier for other people to adapt because they have what we call a total mixed ration, where it all comes out of a machine, where it's fed to the cows. You can put additives in there much easier than a herd of cows like in New Zealand that's grazing pastures, where so we have to do it through genetics or through other mechanisms, and so such as boluses. So it's easier. So this is part of our process is connecting up with the world with a lot of the science that's being done, but at the same time, sort of making sure that it's fit for a purpose from a New Zealand perspective.
Jim Vanderpoel, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Brent.